He only bumped the handlebar a soft graze on his way past the row of parked motorcycles. But the biker didn't see an accident. He saw an old man in a faded jacket and decided that was enough reason to strike. One loud crack, an 84-year-old veteran collapsed to the pavement, hands still gripping the bread he just bought. The bar crowd stared. Phones stayed in pockets. Not one soul stepped forward. But 30 minutes later, the silence shattered. The sky pulsed with blades and a Black Hawk descended onto Main Street. Soldiers in tactical gear spilled out like a storm was coming. Because that wasn't just any old man. That was someone's father. And someone's unit was watching. If you believe dignity doesn't retire with age hit, like type respect in the comments and subscribe, because this story proves some uniforms never come off. Most people pass by Walter Briggs without a second glance. He was just an old man in worn boots shuffling past the same bar he'd passed every Thursday for the past 12 years. 84 years old, retired Army mechanic. 3 deployments, 2 citations, and 1 body. That didn't work the way it used to. He didn't complain, didn't ask for honor or pity, just a quiet seat at the diner, a hot coffee, and time to walk home with the help of his cane. That morning was colder than most. Walter wore his old olive jacket Army issue from 1983, patched in the sleeves but still warm. On his left chest, the faded imprint of a name tag that once read W.B. Briggs. He stepped out of the corner deli, a small paper bag tucked under one arm. Bread cough drops, and a postcard he meant to send to his grandson at the academy. Across the street, a group of bikers had gathered outside a bar, loud, laughing, leaning on chrome machines polished like trophies. Walter paid them no mind. He didn't fear noise. He'd seen worse sounds in places where silence meant danger. As he made his way past the bikes, his coat caught a handlebar, just barely. The motorcycle rocked but didn't fall. Walter stopped immediately, turned around, hands up. "Didn't mean to touch it, son." "My jacket's thicker than I thought," he said, with a small apologetic smile. He wasn't mocking, he wasn't careless. He was just old and kind. But the tallest biker stepped forwards, sunglasses glinting in the noon. "Son." He didn't ask questions. He didn't inspect his bike. He slapped Walter across the face. The sound echoed off the brick walls. The old man hit the sidewalk with a soft grunt, one hand still clutching the paper bag as it tore, bread rolling into the gutter. The laughter from the bar didn't stop. No one moved. Someone sipped a drink and turned their chair. Walter didn't cry out. He just sat up slowly, one knee trembling, face flushed with more humiliation than pain, and began picking up pieces of bread from the street. Walter's cheek burned, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he reached for the crumpled loaf of bread, now speckled with dust and motor oil, and placed it gently back into the torn bag. Like it still mattered, people kept walking. A couple crossed the street to avoid looking. A waitress peered through the diner window, then turned back to her table. The biker who hit him was already laughing with his friends again. No apology, no fear, just the certainty that no one would challenge him over a quiet old man in a faded jacket. Walter stood slowly gripping the metal pole beside the bus bench for balance. His cane had rolled a few feet away. He limped to retrieve it, bent down with a soft groan, and winced not from the pain, but from the weight of being seen and ignored. He sat on the bench and exhaled shakily, the cold air biting the inside of his lungs. His hearing aid buzzed faintly, his pride buzzed louder. Back in 1970, he'd pulled 3 soldiers out of a burning Jeep outside Hughes City. Now, in 2025, he couldn't even get a stranger to hand him a paper towel for the blood at the corner of his mouth. A teenager walked by, earbuds in. Walter raised a hand just slightly, but the boy didn't see or maybe didn't want to. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was looking for proof he still existed. Inside the bar, the biker lit a cigarette and bragged to his buddies. He should have watched where he was going. Damn. Grandpa walked right into it. Walter's jaw tightened. He had been called many things in his life. Soldier husband, dad sergeant. But worthless had never made the list. Still he said nothing, just adjusted his jacket, wiped his lip with the corner of his sleeve, and reached into his pocket. Inside was a cell phone not much more than buttons and a cracked screen, but on the screen was a single contact labeled Eagle 6 Emergency Only. He tapped it once, then leaned back and waited. 15 minutes passed. Walter didn't move from the bench, didn't look angry, didn't look scared. He just sat upright quiet like he was waiting for a bus no one else could see coming. Then came the low, distant thrum. It started as a faint vibration in the pavement. A few diners looked around. Someone stepped outside the bar, squinting at the horizon. Then the sound thickened, a deep, rhythmic pulse that made glasses on tables tremble slightly. The bartender stepped out to check the noise. "That's not a truck," he muttered. And it wasn't. From beyond the tree-line, emerging like thunder on wings, came the unmistakable silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter, low, fast, and headed straight for downtown. Phones came out. Shoppers froze. Dogs barked from passing cars. Within 60 seconds, the Black Hawk was descending into the empty field behind the row of shops. A second later, a matte black SUV pulled up from the opposite direction and screeched to a halt outside the bar. Doors opened in unison. Boots hit the pavement. Not one man raised his voice. A dozen figures in tactical gear stepped out, eyes scanning, movement precise, as if they'd done this 1,000 times and never once got it wrong. Out of the helicopter, one man stepped forward. No sunglasses, no swagger, just command in every line of his posture. He was younger than Walter, but not by much, maybe early 50s. Broad-shouldered jaw, set eyes like steel. He walked straight toward the bench. Walter looked up, blinked once, and nodded. The man didn't salute. He knelt. "Dad," he said quietly, one hand brushing the dried blood from Walter's cheek. "I got here as fast as I could." Walter didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because in that moment, the biker still standing by his friends, still smug in his ignorance, turned slowly toward the growing silence around him and saw the men and saw the patch on the lead man's shoulder. U.S. Army Special Operations. Commander Brigson. The biker finally realized he had just slapped the wrong man. The street was silent now. The biker stood frozen leather vest, creaking slightly as his shoulders stiffened. His smirk evaporated like steam off asphalt. Commander Briggs rose slowly from his kneel hand, steady at his sides. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't clench a fist. He just looked. Behind him, his men fanned out wordlessly, forming a semicircle that closed off the entire block. No weapons in sight, just the kind of presence that made your spine straighten by instinct. Walter, still seated, lowered his head briefly, not in submission, but in quiet acknowledgement. Inside the bar, music had stopped. Someone peeked from behind the blinds. A waitress ducked down behind the bar counter, phone forgotten in her hand. The biker took a step back as Commander Briggs moved forward, his voice quiet but clear. "Which one of you struck a veteran?" No one answered, not at first. Then the biker stepped forward barely, arms raised half in mock defense. "Man, it was just some old guy. He bumped my ride." Briggs didn't blink, didn't flinch. "That old man served this country while you were still learning how to spell your own name." A ripple passed through the onlookers. Someone recording muttered, "Oh, damn." The biker scoffed, trying to hold on to bravado. "You military types think you can just roll in like you own the place." Briggs took one step closer, only one, but it was enough to erase the distance between patience and consequence. "I didn't come here to threaten anyone," he said, calm as a loaded gun. "I came here because my father bled on a sidewalk while cowards laughed." He turned slightly, raising a single finger toward one of his men. The soldier nodded and stepped back, speaking into a radio, clipped to his vest. 2 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up, sirens off, lights cold and silent. This time the cops didn't look bored. They looked cautious. Briggs didn't explain. He just pointed at the biker. The officers understood. The cuffs clicked shut, not in rage, but in quiet resolution. The biker didn't resist. There was no point. The moment those cuffs clicked, his confidence dissolved like cheap ink in the rain. As the officers led him toward the cruiser, a strange stillness fell over the block. People emerged slowly from doorways and windows, as if waking from a spell. Walter still sat on the bench, his hands resting on his cane, his expression unreadable. Commander Briggs returned to him, quietly crouching again to eye level. "You okay?" Walter nodded faintly, then offered something almost like a smile. "I've had worse," he muttered, but not in front of so many people who did nothing. That line hung in the air. A woman with gray-streaked hair took a tentative step forward, then another. She approached Walter with her eyes down, holding out a clean handkerchief. I should have said something. I'm sorry." Walter took it, gently nodded, and then it began. A young man near the coffee shop removed his baseball cap. A father lifted his child onto his shoulders and whispered something. A boy no older than 10 stood ramrod straight and saluted, clumsy but earnest. The crowd around the bar slowly transformed. Phones lowered, hands extended. No one shouted, no one cheered. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about respect, long overdue. One older man stepped forward, chest tight beneath a weathered flannel, and stood at attention, a retired sailor. Another joined him, former Air Force. And just like that, a small line of veterans formed along the sidewalk, shoulder to shoulder. Briggs stood back and let it happen. His team didn't move. They watched silently, like they knew this moment wasn't about them. It was for a man who'd never asked for thanks, but had finally earned it publicly. Walter sat a little taller, not out of pride or but relief, as if something heavy had finally been lifted off his chest after years of being carried quietly. This wasn't just about a slap anymore. It was about every time he'd been overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten, and now finally seen. By evening, the video had made its way across the internet. The slap, the silence, the Black Hawk, the arrest. No music, no edits, just raw footage that didn't need dramatizing. Respect the elder Walter Briggs, quiet strength. Within hours, local news stations picked it up. By morning, it was on national broadcasts. They didn't just report the incident, they told his story. Sergeant Walter Briggs, Army Mechanic, Gulf War, Kosovo. 3 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart, and until yesterday, completely invisible. The bar issued a half-hearted statement. Unfortunate incident not representative of our values. But people remembered the laughter, the turnbacks, the closed doors. They weren't forgiving it. The mayor called Walter's son, personally asked if the city could honor his father with a community event. Briggs said only, "If it's for him, not for press, he'll show up." Within a week, the town green had been transformed. A stage rows of folding chairs, an entire middle school chorus rehearsing the national anthem. Walter arrived in a wheelchair this time, not because he was weak, but because someone finally offered to push him and he let them. The crowd rose as one not out of obligation, out of something heavier, a recognition that dignity, when restored, becomes contagious. The mayor read a prepared speech, but what people remembered was the voice of Walter's son. Commander Briggs stepped to the mic and paused for a long moment. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He didn't need to. His life spoke louder than anything fists could say. He turned to his father, eyes glassy. You taught me what strength looks like, and now the world knows it too. He stepped down. Walter didn't speak. He just raised one hand in acknowledgement, firm, slow, deliberate. The ovation lasted nearly 4 minutes. Not for medals, not for revenge, but for every quiet act of service no one had clapped for until now. A few days later, Walter received an unexpected letter, handwritten, shaky, no-return address. Inside were 6 words. If you'll meet me, I'll listen. It came from the biker. At first, Walter didn't respond. He had every right to ignore it. No one would have judged him for walking away. But something in the way the letter was written, uneven lines, ink smudged at the edges, reminded him of another broken man from long ago, one of his own from the service, haunted, angry, but not beyond reach. He asked his son to arrange a short meeting before the biker's court hearing. In a quiet courthouse room, with no cameras and no uniforms, the man who had once slapped him sat hunched forward, stripped of attitude leather vest, replaced with a plain button-up, hands clenched like he was bracing for impact. Walter entered slowly. Didn't speak at first, just sat across from him, with a veteran stillness that could silence an entire room. I didn't know who you were, the biker muttered. That's the problem, Walter replied gently. You didn't care. The man swallowed, hard eyes darting. My dad was a soldier too. Vietnam came back shattered. I grew up hating uniforms because I thought they took him from me. Walter nodded slowly. I knew men like him. Lost just as much as they brought home. There was no lecture, no punishment. Oh, just a quiet space where truth finally stood up, straighter than pride. The biker, his name was Kyle, wiped his face roughly and slid a folded paper across the table. Judge's orders or not, I'm starting therapy. Signed up to volunteer at the VA downtown. I want to earn something back. Walter looked at the form, then at the man who had once knocked him to the ground. He reached out, laid one weathered hand over Kyle's. You won't earn it fast, but every day you show up, you'll get closer." Kyle nodded, tears running freely now. That meeting would never make headlines, but it changed 2 lives in that quiet room. 6 months later, the corner of Broad Street and Ellison Avenue looked different. Where once there had been silence, now stood a bronze plaque mounted on a polished stone wall. It read, "In honor of Sergeant Walter Briggs, a quiet shield between us and chaos." Beneath it, a single line etched deeper than the rest. He never asked to be seen. He simply stood. People paused now when they passed. Not everyone, not every time, but enough. Students brought flowers on Veterans Day. A local artist painted Walter's silhouette into a mural of community heroes, and the city council voted unanimously to rename that small park behind the bar Briggs Field. Walter still visited on Thursdays. Same boots, same jacket, same slow, steady walk. But now, someone always waved first. A teenager on a skateboard would nod respectfully. A new recruit from town would stop to shake his hand. A father would point him out to his child, not as a legend, but as an example. Kyle, the man who had once struck him, now drove veterans to and from the VA twice a week. He wore no uniform, but his actions started to fit like one. Sometimes Walter saw him at the diner, helping a frail vet into a booth, or carrying someone's groceries. They never made a show of it, just exchanged small nods. Warriors on different ends of the road, walking it in the same direction now. Commander Briggs returned only once after the ceremony. He and Walter sat on the same bench. No need to speak much. After a while, his son simply said, "You taught them something, Dad. You changed this place." Walter smiled faintly, watching a boy tie a flag to his bike nearby. Maybe. Or maybe they just remembered what mattered. That night, as the wind rolled through the trees near the bar, the sound of distant rotors could almost be heard again. Not from the sky this time, but from memory. And if you stood long enough, you could almost hear it, the moment a town stood still, because one man refused to fall alone. If you believe respect shouldn't come after pain, if you believe some uniforms never really come off hit, like type honor in the comments and subscribe to Silent Valor Stories, because the quiet ones, they're the ones who move and